Her true story from California Ms. When my son got married, I kept quiet about the $7 million I inherited from my husband. Thank God I did. The California sun has a way of making everything look honest. It spills over the rolling hills of Napa Valley, gilds the vineyards, and makes even the most carefully constructed facades seem transparent. But I learned long ago that sunlight can't penetrate the shadows in a person's heart. Sometimes, the brightest smiles hide the darkest intentions. My name is Evelyn Hale, and my story isn't about what I lost, but about what I was wise enough never to reveal. It began, as these things often do, with a wedding. My only son, Alex, was marrying a woman named Chloe. The engagement party was held at the Fairmont in San Francisco, a glittering affair that cost more than I'd spent on groceries in 2 years. I remember standing in that marble-floored lobby, watching crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on the walls, feeling like an intruder in my own son's life. I met Chloe for the first time over a rehearsal dinner at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a single, polished oak door. The maitre d' looked at my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to Richard's funeral, with the kind of polite disdain reserved for people who clearly didn't belong. But Alex had insisted I come, and so there I was, seated between his future mother-in-law, a woman whose plastic surgery had left her face frozen in perpetual surprise, and his college roommate Jake, who kept checking his Apple Watch every 30 seconds. Chloe was beautiful, in the way a magazine advertisement is beautiful, lawless, expensive, and a little cold to the touch. Her blonde hair was arranged in what I later learned was called a messy bun that had probably taken an hour to perfect. She wore a cream-colored dress that I suspected cost more than my monthly pension, and diamond earrings that caught the candlelight like tiny stars. She had a law degree she didn't use, a lifestyle blog that preached authentic living through $500 face creams, and an ambition that glittered in her eyes like shattered glass. "Evelyn, it is so wonderful to finally meet you," she'd said, rising gracefully from her chair, her grip firm, her smile perfect. "Alex has told me so much about you. How you raised him all on your own after his father passed when he was just 12. You must be so proud. What an incredible sacrifice you made." The word sacrifice hung in the air like expensive perfume, overwhelming and slightly nauseating. I noticed how she emphasized it, as if my entire life had been one long, noble suffering. Around the table, I caught fragments of conversations. "Did you see the Hamptons house Jennifer bought?" From the woman across from me, and "the IPO should hit 50 million easily," from a man in a navy blazer who hadn't looked up from his phone once. "He's a wonderful young man," I replied simply, my voice nearly lost in the clatter of silverware against bone china. "I'm very proud of him." "And you're still in that charming little house in San Jose?" Chloe continued, her voice carrying just enough volume that the neighboring tables could hear. Alex showed me pictures. So authentic, so real. In this world of McMansions and pretentious displays, it's refreshing to see someone who values simplicity over show. I was proud, but I was also cautious. My late husband, Richard, had not been a flashy man. He wore the same 3 button-down shirts to work for 15 years, rotated his ties on a weekly schedule, and drove his Honda Civic until the odometer hit 200,000 miles. He was a quiet software engineer who, in the early 1990s, developed a piece of data compression technology that became the industry standard. He worked in his home office, a converted bedroom filled with humming computers and towers of technical manuals, often forgetting to eat dinner until I brought him a sandwich at midnight. The night he sold his company to a tech giant, we sat in our kitchen drinking instant coffee from chipped mugs. "Evelyn," he'd said, sliding the final contract across the Formica table, "we're rich now, $7.2 million rich." I remember staring at the number, the zeros blurring together like raindrops on a window. "What do we do now?" I'd asked. "Nothing different," he'd replied, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "We keep living our life. Money is just a tool, not a destination." We lived in the same modest 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet San Jose suburb we'd bought in 1987 for $87,000. We drove our reliable Toyota until the transmission finally gave out, then bought another Toyota, 5 years old and practical. We saved, we invested quietly, we donated anonymously to the local library and the community college where I'd worked as a librarian for 32 years. Before he died of pancreatic cancer, during those final weeks when the California sun seemed too bright and every sound too loud, Richard sat me down in our sun-drenched living room. The same room where we'd watched Alex take his first steps, where we'd helped him with homework at the coffee table, where we'd argued about whether to get cable television. "Evelyn," he'd said, his hand covering mine, his wedding ring now loose on his finger, "the money is all yours now. $7 million, tucked away in trusts and investments. Arthur Davies has all the paperwork, but promise me something." His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "Be careful. Money doesn't change people, it just makes them more of who they already are. Don't show your cards until you're sure who's at the table with you." So, when Alex married Chloe at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay, with 300 guests and a 7-tier cake that looked like architectural engineering, I kept my promise. They saw me as Evelyn Hale, a retired school librarian living on a modest pension in a dated but well-kept home. They had no idea I was Evelyn Hale, the sole benefactor of Richard Hale's quiet genius. And as I watched Chloe across that dinner table, her eyes scanning my simple wool dress and the single string of pearls I wore, pearls Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary, quiet intuition told me Richard's advice was the most valuable inheritance he had ever left me. The first year of their marriage was a slow, calculated siege. They would visit on Sundays, bringing organic wine from boutique vineyards and condescending advice wrapped in concern. Chloe would arrive in workout clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying her oversized designer handbag like a shield. Alex would follow behind, his eyes glued to his phone, already distant and distracted. "Mom, this kitchen is so vintage," Chloe would say, running a perfectly manicured finger over my Formica countertops, the same ones where I'd rolled out thousands of Christmas cookies, where Alex had done his science projects, where Richard and I had shared quiet morning coffee for 28 years. "We should really look into getting you a grant for senior home improvements. A nice, modern quartz would really increase the property value. I know a contractor who specializes in senior-friendly renovations." She'd open my cabinets without permission, examining my mismatched dishes and vintage Tupperware with the critical eye of an appraiser. "And this refrigerator, Evelyn, when was this purchased?" "The 1980s? The energy efficiency alone must be costing you hundreds annually. There are programs for seniors, you know, federal assistance for appliance replacement." "We're worried about you, Mom," Alex would chime in, his voice laced with a concern that sounded rehearsed, practiced in front of their bathroom mirror. "This house is so big for one person. All the upkeep. The roof needs work, doesn't it? And when was the last time you had the electrical checked? Maybe it's time to think about downsizing. We could help you find a nice, manageable condo, something modern with a security system and on-site maintenance." The word manageable became their favorite. Everything about my life needed to be managed, contained, simplified. They treated my garden like a burden, my photo albums like clutter, my memories like obstacles to their vision of my future. During one particularly memorable visit, I'd made my famous lasagna, the same recipe I'd perfected over 30 years, the one Alex used to beg me to make for his birthday every year until he turned 18. I'd spent the morning in the kitchen, layering noodles and cheese and the meat sauce that had been my mother's recipe before it was mine. The house filled with the warm, rich smell of herbs and tomatoes, the same smell that had welcomed Alex home from school for 12 years. When they arrived, Chloe took one look at the dining room table, set with my good Chinath pattern Richard and I had selected as newlywed and her face fell. "Oh, Evelyn, this is so much food. You know Alex is watching his carbs now, right? And I'm on a clean eating protocol. Dr. Martinez says dairy causes inflammation." She pulled out her phone and photographed the lasagna, not to share, but to show her personal trainer as evidence of the food pushers in her life. I watched my son, the boy who used to lick the sauce spoon when he thought I wasn't looking, poke at the corner of his serving with his fork as if it might be poisonous. "Mom, maybe next time, just a simple salad?" Alex suggested, not meeting my eyes. "Something lighter. We're really trying to maintain a certain lifestyle." I looked at the table laden with food made with love, at the empty chairs where grandchildren should have been sitting, at my son who had become a stranger in his own childhood home. But I smiled and nodded, because that's what they expected. That's what kept me invisible, and invisibility had become my greatest asset. They saw my life as a problem to be solved, a portfolio to be liquidated. They treated me like a gentle, slightly senile burden they had magnanimously agreed to shoulder. Every conversation became a subtle intervention, every visit a step closer to their ultimate goal, transforming me from a person into a manageable expense. The breaking point, though I didn't reveal it at the time, came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was tending to my roses, the climbing variety that Richard had planted along the back fence the year before Alex was born, when I heard voices from the kitchen. The window was cracked open, letting in the spring air, and their words carried clearly across the garden. "She's becoming more stubborn," Chloe was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "Did you see how she just stared at me when I mentioned the condo brochures? It's like she's deliberately being difficult." "She's always been set in her ways," Alex replied, and I could picture him shrugging, the same gesture he'd made as a teenager when I'd ask him about his homework. "But she's getting older, less flexible. Sometimes I wonder if there's some, cognitive decline starting." "That's exactly what I mean." Chloe's voice grew animated, excited. "We need to act before it gets worse, before she makes some mistake that costs her everything. What if she forgets to pay property taxes? What if she falls and lies there for days because she's too proud to wear a medical alert?" I knelt there in the dirt, my hands frozen around the pruning shears, listening to them plan my future like I was already gone. "My friend Jessica went through this with her mother-in-law," Chloe continued, "waited too long to intervene. By the time they moved her to assisted living, she'd already lost half her savings to some telephone scam. These elderly people, Alex, they're vulnerable. They need protection from themselves." Protection from themselves. As if independence were a disease that needed treatment. Then came their big idea. Mark, a friend of Chloe's from business school, had developed a concept for a luxury wellness brand called Elysian Lifestyles. I met Mark during one of their Sunday visits. A thin man with aggressive handshakes and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He wore jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and spoke in buzzwords that sounded impressive until you realized they meant nothing. "This is going to be huge, Mom," Alex explained, his eyes shining with the fervor of a convert, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. "We're talking about disrupting the entire wellness space. Curated subscription boxes with artisanal products, high-end athleisure wear made from sustainable bamboo fiber, and a meditation app that features AI-driven mindfulness tailored to individual biorhythms." He pulled out his laptop, showing me slide after slide of charts and graphs and stock photos of beautiful people doing yoga on cliffs. "Mark has connections with influencers who have millions of followers. Chloe's going to be the face of the brand, the authentic wellness journey, documented in real time. We're talking about building an empire, Mom, a whole new chapter for us." It was, in short, a beautifully packaged box of air, but they believed in it with the desperation of people who had never built anything real, never earned anything through patience and persistence. "We just need seed funding," Alex continued, clicking through financial projections that seemed to have been generated by wishful thinking rather than market research. "About $1.5 million to start. We're talking to venture capitalists, but you know how that goes. Everyone wants to see traction first, but you need capital to build traction. It's a catch-22. Chloe leaned forward from her perch on my couch, her yoga-toned body arranged in what I'd learned was her sincere listening pose. "The beauty of it, Evelyn, is that we're not just building a business, we're building a movement. A community of people who understand that wellness isn't just about looking good, it's about feeling authentic, living your truth, embracing your highest self." I nodded politely, asking the kinds of questions a confused elderly person might ask. And people will pay for this, monthly? Premium subscribers will pay $299 monthly. Mark interjected, his voice confident. But they're not just paying for products, they're paying for transformation, for access to a lifestyle that most people only dream about. They never once asked if I could help. Why would they? In their eyes, I was the woman who clipped coupons and worried about the price of gas, who still used a flip phone and wrote checks at the grocery store. The thought that I could fund their entire venture with a single phone call was as alien to them as the concept of humility. My silence became my laboratory. I watched them, I listened, I took notes, not on paper, but in the careful filing system of my memory. I catalogued every slight, every assumption, every moment when they revealed their true feelings about the woman who had raised the man they claimed to love. My ledger was not a book, but a series of moments that accumulated like compound interest. The time Chloe accidentally donated my late husband's favorite leather armchair to Goodwill because it was too bulky for the room and didn't match the aesthetic we're trying to create. The chair where Richard had read bedtime stories to Alex, where he'd dozed off watching Sunday football, where he'd spent his final weeks when climbing the stairs became too difficult. I discovered its absence on a Thursday morning, the empty space in the living room like a missing tooth. When I called Chloe to ask about it, her voice was bright with false innocence. "Oh, that old thing? Evelyn, it was practically falling apart. The leather was cracked, the springs were shot. I thought you'd be relieved to have the space opened up. So much more feng shui now, don't you think?" The time Alex suggested I sell my old-fashioned jewelry to help with living expenses. He was particularly interested in my engagement ring, a modest solitaire that Richard had bought with 2 months' salary from his first engineering job. "Mom, that setting is so outdated. If you had it reset in something more contemporary, it would probably be worth twice as much. Or better yet, sell it and invest in something practical. Maybe upgrade that ancient car of yours." The ring had never left my finger in 43 years, not even during the 2 surgeries when the nurses had to wrap it in surgical tape. But to Alex, it was just another asset to be optimized, another piece of my past that needed modernizing. The time I overheard Chloe on the phone with her mother, her voice carrying through the thin walls of my house as she stood in the backyard, pacing the same path Richard had worn into the grass during his evening walks. "No, his mom has nothing," she was saying, her laugh sharp and bitter. "We'll probably have to support her in a few years when the house starts falling apart and she can't keep up with the maintenance. It's such a weight, but what can you do? Family is family. At least the house is in a decent neighborhood. When we finally have to sell it, the land value alone should cover a few years in a decent facility." A weight, that word again, the anthem of the ungrateful. But the moment that crystallized everything, the moment when their true intentions became undeniable, came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, and I opened it to find Alex and Chloe standing on my porch with the kind of determined expressions people wear when they're about to perform an unpleasant but necessary task. They weren't alone. Behind them stood a woman I didn't recognize, a professional-looking person in a navy blazer carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of smile people learn in sales training seminars. "Mom, we'd like you to meet Janet Morrison," Alex said, stepping aside to usher the stranger into my living room, my sanctuary, without invitation. "She's a senior living specialist. We thought it might be helpful for you to hear about some of the options available." Janet Morrison had clearly done this before. She moved through my house with practiced efficiency, her eyes taking inventory of the outdated fixtures, the worn carpet, the family photos covering every surface. She settled into Richard's chair, his chair, which Chloe had tried to donate, and spread her materials across my coffee table like a general planning a campaign. "Mrs. Hale," she began, her voice warm and patronizing in the way people speak to children and the elderly. "Your family has asked me to share some information about Golden Meadows Senior Living Community. It's really quite wonderful, a place where you can maintain your independence while having access to all the support and security you need." She opened a glossy brochure that looked like a vacation resort advertisement. The cover featured silver-haired people playing tennis, painting watercolors, and laughing over meals that looked nothing like institutional food. Golden Meadows isn't just a place to live, Mrs. Hale. It's a lifestyle, a community of peers who understand this phase of life. No more worrying about home maintenance, no more isolation, no more burden on your family. There was that word again, burden. You'd have your own apartment, Alex said, leaning forward with forced enthusiasm. Your own little space, completely private. But with 3 meals a day prepared by professional chefs, housekeeping service, transportation to shopping and medical appointments. Think about it, Mom. No more yard work, no more roof repairs, no more worrying about whether the furnace will make it through another winter. And the best part, Chloe added, her voice honeyed with fake sweetness, is that you'll be around people your own age. People who understand your experiences, who lived through the same historical moments. You'll make friends, Mom, real friends, not just polite neighbors you wave to over the fence. The implication was clear. I was lonely, isolated, pathetic. A burden who needed to be managed, contained, made convenient. Janet Morrison pulled out another brochure, this one focused on the financial benefits. The equity in your home, Mrs. Hale, will easily cover your residency fees for many years. Possibly decades, depending on the final assessment. Your family won't have to worry about your financial security, and you won't have to worry about fluctuating expenses or unexpected repairs. We've already put down a deposit, Alex said, avoiding my eyes. Just to hold your spot on the waiting list. Golden Meadows is very popular. People wait years to get in. A deposit? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Just to hold your spot, Chloe said quickly, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to explain. Nothing binding, of course. But the waiting list is so long, and at your age, Evelyn, we can't afford to wait. This way, when you're ready to make the transition, everything will be in place. No stress, no panic, no scrambling to find something appropriate. They had it all planned out. The house would go on the market within a month of my departure, a quick sale to eliminate the carrying costs. My furniture would be donated. Most of it won't fit in the apartment anyway, and Golden Meadows provides all the essentials. My car would be sold, you won't need it. And the insurance savings alone will pay for months of cable television. My life would be dismantled, packaged, and disposed of with the efficiency of a professional moving company. It's the most responsible thing to do, Evelyn. Janet Morrison concluded, gathering her materials with the satisfaction of someone who had just closed a deal. It takes the burden off everyone. There it was, the end game. They weren't just trying to manage my life, they were trying to liquidate it. To pack me away in a box labeled "handled," so they could be free of the weight of a mother they assumed was destitute and becoming more burdensome by the day. I looked at my son, the boy whose fevers I had nursed through countless nights, whose college education I had paid for from our carefully accumulated savings before the inheritance ever came through, whose wedding I had attended with a smile despite knowing his bride saw me as an obstacle to be managed. I saw a stranger, a weak man hollowed out by his wife's ambition and his own inability to stand up for the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. Richard's words echoed in my ears like a prophecy. Money doesn't change people, it just makes them more of who they already are. I smiled a soft, sad smile, the kind of expression that had become my trademark in their presence. It looks lovely, dears, I said, my voice carrying just the right note of tired resignation. Let me think about it. They left, triumphant. I watched from my front window as they stood in my driveway, Alex shaking hands with Janet Morrison, Chloe already on her phone, probably sharing the good news with her mother. They thought they had won. They thought the gentle, quiet librarian had finally been convinced to get into her box. The moment their car pulled away leased BMW that cost more per month than my first apartment, I picked up the phone. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to my financial advisor, Mr. Davies, a shrewd, silver-haired man who had managed Richard's portfolio for 20 years and had become something of a grandfather figure to me in the years since Richard's death. Arthur, I said, my voice steady for the first time in months, I need you to set up a new shell corporation. an investment LLC. I want it to be completely anonymous, untraceable to me personally. Call it Argent Capital Solutions. Evelyn? His voice carried concern and curiosity in equal measure. Is everything all right? This is rather unusual. Everything is perfect, Arthur, I said, settling into Richard's chair with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since his funeral. And I'm about to become an angel investor, a very particular kind of angel investor. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the compliant, slightly confused old woman considering her options. I let them bring me more brochures from Golden Meadows. I asked questions about the meal plan, the activities schedule, the visiting hours. I even agreed to take a tour, during which I played the role perfectly, shuffling slightly, squinting at the price lists, expressing concern about the monthly fees. It's quite expensive, I told the director, Mrs. Patterson, a woman whose aggressive cheer reminded me of a game show host. I'm not sure my savings will stretch far enough. Oh, Mrs. Hale, she replied, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. That's what families are for. I'm sure your son and daughter-in-law will make sure you're taken care of. That's what love is, making sacrifices for the people who matter most. Meanwhile, Arthur and I worked quietly, efficiently, like the engineers we had both married. He set up Argent Capital Solutions with layers of legal protection that would make it virtually impossible to trace back to me. We created a board of directors consisting of Arthur's associates, people who had worked with Richard and understood both discretion and justice. We established credit lines, investment protocols, and communication channels that would allow me to operate completely anonymously. As expected, Alex and Chloe were struggling to find investors for their Elysian Lifestyles venture. Their flashy proposal was all style and no substance, impressive to look at but lacking any real foundation. The venture capitalists they approached asked uncomfortable questions about market research, customer acquisition costs, and sustainable business models, questions they couldn't answer because they had never thought beyond the fantasy of easy success. I began intercepting fragments of their increasingly desperate phone conversations, late-night calls to potential investors who had already said no, panicked discussions about making payroll for the 2 employees they'd already hired based on their optimistic projections, arguments between Alex and Chloe about whose fault it was that their dream was falling apart. Maybe we aimed too high, I heard Alex say one evening as they sat in my backyard, his voice carrying through the kitchen window. Maybe we should scale back, start smaller. Scale back? Chloe's response was sharp, angry. Alex, we've already told everyone about this. My Instagram followers, your college friends, Mark's investors. We can't just scale back. We'll look like failures. We are failing, Alex replied, and for a moment I heard the echo of the practical, realistic boy I had raised. We've been at this for months, and we have nothing to show for it except debt and promises we can't keep. Don't you dare give up on me now, Chloe's voice rose, carrying clearly across the garden where Richard's roses were beginning their fall bloom. This is our chance, Alex. Our one chance to build something real, something meaningful. I am not going to spend the rest of my life being ordinary. That word ordinary spoken like a curse, as if there was something shameful about living a quiet, honest life. As if the 33 years I had spent teaching children to read, the 43 years I had spent loving Richard, the countless moments of small kindness and daily dedication were somehow less valuable than their fantasy of Instagram fame and venture capital glory. Then, Argent Capital Solutions made its move. Through a third-party lawyer Arthur had worked with for years, we contacted them. An anonymous investor, he explained in a formal letter delivered to their apartment, had seen their pitch deck through mutual connections and was intrigued by their market disruption, potential, and commitment to authentic wellness solutions. Argent Capital Solutions was prepared to offer them the full $1.5 million in seed funding in exchange for a 60% controlling stake in the company. They didn't hesitate, they didn't question the high percentage or ask for references or demand to meet the mysterious investor. They were drowning, and they saw a lifeline. Within 48 hours, they had signed the papers in a whirlwind of giddy excitement, their signatures flowing across the documents that would give me complete control over their dreams. The first board meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning at a sleek, rented conference room on the 32nd floor of a San Francisco skyscraper. They spent the entire weekend rehearsing their presentation, practicing their pitch in front of their bathroom mirror, choosing their outfits with the care of actors preparing for opening night. I watched them leave that morning from my kitchen window, dressed in their power suits, carrying matching leather portfolios, their faces bright with anticipation. They looked like children playing dress-up, convinced that costume and confidence could substitute for competence and character. I arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in a simple, elegant navy blue suit I'd had tailored for the occasion, the string of pearls Richard had given me, and a quiet smile that held 43 years of marriage, 33 years of teaching, and 2 weeks of very careful planning. The conference room was all glass and chrome, designed to impress rather than comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the San Francisco Bay that probably cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. Alex and Chloe sat at one end of the long table, their presentation materials spread out before them like battle plans, their faces glowing with nervous excitement. When I walked in, the change was immediate and devastating. Alex went pale, a sickly, greenish-white that reminded me of the time he'd eaten too much Halloween candy at age 7. His hand, reaching for his water glass, froze mid-motion. Chloe looked as if she had been struck by lightning, her carefully applied makeup suddenly garish against her bloodless skin. Her perfectly glossed lips opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. "Mom?" Alex stammered, his voice cracking like it had when he was 13. What are you doing here? There must be some mistake." I walked to the head of the long conference table with the measured pace of someone who had taught thousands of restless children that authority comes not from volume but from certainty. I placed my leather satchel down the same one I had carried to parent-teacher conferences and faculty meetings for 3 decades and turned to Arthur's associate, Mr. Klein, who had been playing his role perfectly. "Thank you for arranging everything, Mr. Klein," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "You may go now." He nodded and left, his footsteps muffled by the expensive carpet, closing the door softly behind him with the finality of a curtain falling. We were alone, predator and prey, justice and consequence, mother and the son who had forgotten what that word meant. "I believe," I said, looking from my son's terrified face to my daughter-in-law's mask of horror, "that you were about to present a quarterly report to the primary shareholder and chairman of the board of Argent Capital Solutions. Please, proceed." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco sparkled in the morning sunlight, innocent and beautiful, while in this sterile room, 32 floors above the street, a lifetime of assumptions crumbled into dust. Chloe found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Your Argent Capital? But how? That's impossible. You don't have. I mean, where would you get? $1.5 million? I finished for her, settling into my chair with the comfort of someone who had finally come home. Is that what you're trying to ask, Chloe? Where a retired librarian living on a modest pension could possibly find $1.5 million to invest in her son's business venture. Alex leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished table, his voice desperate. "Mom, please, just tell us what's going on. This doesn't make sense. How do you know about Argent Capital? How are you here? Or is it just impossible for you to imagine?" I continued, ignoring his questions with the practiced skill of a teacher who had learned to control classroom disruptions. "That the woman you were planning to put in a budget nursing home could own you, your company, and your entire future?" I reached into my satchel and withdrew a folder, not the glossy presentation materials they had prepared, but a simple manila folder containing documents that told a very different story. Richard was a very smart man, Alex, and a very successful one, apparently more successful than you ever bothered to learn. I let the weight of that sink in. I watched the gears turn in their heads, the calculations, the reevaluations, the dawning, sickening realization of how badly they had misplayed their hand. Alex's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, the crushing weight of consequences. $7 million, I said quietly, the number falling into the silence like a stone into still water. That's what Richard left me when he died. $7 million in carefully managed investments, growing quietly while you assumed I was surviving on Social Security and whatever pittance a retired librarian might have scraped together. Chloe's hands were shaking now, her manicured fingers drumming against the table in a nervous rhythm that echoed like gunshots. But you live in that house, you drive that old car. You clip coupons, for God's sake. I live in the house where I raised my son and loved my husband. I corrected her, my voice sharp as winter wind. I drive a reliable car because flashy cars don't make you a better person. And I clip coupons because that's how you build wealth, by understanding the value of money instead of throwing it away on things designed to impress people you don't even like. I opened the folder and began laying out documents across the table. Bank statements, investment portfolios, trust documents, all the proof they needed to understand just how completely they had misjudged the woman they thought they could manipulate. Now, I said, my voice crisp and businesslike, let's talk about Elysian lifestyles. I've reviewed the business plan extensively. I've had it analyzed by people who actually understand market research and sustainable business models, and my conclusion is simple: it's garbage. Alex jerked as if I had slapped him. Mom, you can't just. The brand is vapid, I continued, overriding his protest with the authority of someone who had just purchased the right to speak without interruption. The products are derivative, purchased in bulk from overseas manufacturers and marked up 300%. The mission statement is meaningless corporate buzzwords strung together by someone who has never built anything real. And the financial projections are fantasy designed to fool investors who don't know better. I reached for another document, a legal brief that Arthur had prepared with surgical precision. As of this moment, Elysian Lifestyles is dissolved. Its assets, including the $1.5 million of my money you were so eager to spend, are now the property of a new entity. I slid another folder across the table. The logo on the front was simple, elegant, a single oak tree. The company is being rebranded. It's now the Hale Legacy Foundation. Its mission is to fund STEM education scholarships for underprivileged girls and provide seed funding for ethical technology startups. The kind of work your father believed in, Alex. The kind of work that adds real value to the world. I stood up. The meeting concluded. Your positions are terminated. However, the foundation is hiring 2 unpaid interns. The work involves sorting grant applications and making coffee. It's a chance to learn humility. You can let me know your decision by the end of the day. I paused at the door. Oh, and about Golden Meadows? I canceled your deposit. I used the money to make a donation in your father's name. They're renaming their library the Richard Hale Reading Room. A more fitting legacy, don't you think? I walked out, leaving them in the silent, expensive room with the wreckage of their ambition. They thought they were selling a dream. They never realized they had just sold their souls. And I was the one who held the deed.